actual consequence when there's a little bit of ignoring anatomy and biological differences, and how that could negatively potentially affect ladies as well, and vice versa. If we're trying to make men act like women, is there some potential harm that could be had by ignoring some of these biomarkers? So Leslie, and then anyone else can kind of jump in.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, Jeff. And it's nice to see all of you. It's nice to see you again, Danny. And yeah, it's a great topic. I think that it's the answer isn't really simple because it's a mixed bag. I mean, there have definitely been some necessary strides made in terms of giving women equal legal rights in society. I think that's super important. But then you look at things like the normalization of daycare and sending your kids off to be raised by somebody else while you go to work. And that's really devastating. It's devastating to families, children, and to generations of people. I think there's a really high level of distrust between men and women right now, and some of that is owed to feminism going too far. I'm somebody who's never considered myself a feminist, and I used to feel kind of like what Anya was just talking about, that sort of false dilemma that you're kind of placed in this black and white choice. Oh, you're not a feminist? Does that mean that you don't support women and women's rights? And not at all. But there always has been, for me in my life, and I'm a Gen Xer, sort of an angry tenor to the feminist archetype. You know, I can remember friends when I was younger just freely talking terribly about men and boys, and I think some of the most wonderful literature in the world is written by men, and they show that they have so much heart and soul and beauty and depth. And are we just really going to dismiss them and lump them into one little category? We don't want that done to us, so why would we do that to them? And I think that it's always seemed very angry. And likewise, it's interesting right now, I feel like there's a lot of pressure to condemn feminism. And I feel like that also is sort of a black and white choice, that I'm not ready to full on do that either, because I think that there have been strides that have been made. Although for me, I sit outside of that. I don't consider myself a feminist per se, but I do think it's a rather nuanced and mixed bag. And we could really get into it here. I'd love to talk about the pill and some of the points that Louise Perry makes in her book, which is an excellent book. I'd give it to any young woman. And so much more to say. I look forward to hearing other people's thoughts as well. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. So anybody else? It's popcorn style, and everybody's willing to kind of jump in from here. Oh, and real quick, anybody that's currently watching, if you haven't done so, please make sure that you make sure that you share it with at least 2, 3, 4, or even 5 people. And listen, y'all, these panels ain't always cheap. So if y'all want this type of stuff to keep happening, make sure you guys hit that $ or super chat button and show love to the platform. And real quick, I want to read one. Dr. Vince Johnson, thank you for the $1.99. What an amazing panel. Thank you. So yeah, whoever was about to speak, you're more than welcome to go ahead and start.
I was just going to pick up on something that Leslie said, and something that was in the clip earlier from Louise as well. And this idea that feminism is convincing women to act more like men, and it is. But there's an important point in there. It's not actually convincing women to act like men. It is convincing women to act like the feminist caricature of men. And that's a really important point, because actually it turns out that large proportions of men are not especially interested in casual sex, and not outside of like really sort of short period of early adult life, where in fact both sexes are reasonably motivated for casual sex. And if you sort of think about the maths of that for a minute, it can't be the case that men are having a whole heap more casual sex than women are, because who are they having it with, right? If we're talking about, if we restrict ourselves to heterosexual interactions, whatever casual sex is going on, well, it's happening between equal numbers of men and women. So the notion that men are engaging in all of this casual sex, doing it happily and freely, and it's not having any ongoing psychological impacts on them is a furphy. And of course, the idea that women should behave like that is an even bigger furphy. So I think that's sort of one of the points that doesn't get acknowledged enough. Feminism caricatures men, and we see it in the toxic masculinity discourse. That's obviously a caricature of men, but we see it in all of these supposed sort of positive things that feminism is trying to compel women to do to close every imaginable gender gap and sex difference you could possibly put your hand on. What it's actually encouraging women to do is to take on a very warped and narrow view of what men do and what men like. That the sexes actually differ far less in their proclivity toward casual sex and their desire for a long-term relationship and things like that. So what feminism has done is, first of all, demonize men and turn them into a cartoon version, and then encourage women to try and strive to achieve that cartoon version for themselves. It's really quite serious and quite twisted.
Well, I'm gonna say real quick, and Nkechi and the others who haven't spoken yet, I want y'all to hop in. I didn't realize I should have bought all of y'all chef hats. I didn't realize what was about to happen with the amount of cooking that's about to go on this panel. Nkechi and then Alan and everybody else. I'll jump in.
Yeah, so my concern with a lot of the discourse right now about feminism is that we're blaming feminism for failing families, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so has economics, so is political policy, so is racism, so is war, so is mass incarceration. So if you only blame feminism, you're not really doing analysis, you're doing nostalgia. And I feel like the nostalgia, especially in the Black community, that's like a pause, because nostalgia goes back to a time we don't want to go back to for anybody raising Black children, Black sons, having extended family members in the community. Like, we don't want to go back 100 years. You know, we don't want to go back to the time before women had the right to vote. I mean, probably nobody does, but I'm just saying, like, that nostalgia, it's like, oh, you know, back when we had these stable nuclear families. Well, who had those stable nuclear families? And so I feel like when it comes to feminism, we also don't talk about the difference between feminism and womanism. Womanism involves, incorporates race and class considerations, because, well, white women were being freed up to go enter the workforce. Who's taking care of the kids? You know, who's cleaning the house? Who's doing the things that women were escaping from doing to have careers initially in that first wave? And so there was kind of like this sort of that still persists, this nostalgia kind of idea of like the nuclear family that typically positions traditional conservative white families as the model. And with I launched a very soft launch, and I haven't spent a lot of time on it, but a trad pro podcast, meaning traditional progressive. And my contention is that you can be a traditional woman, mother, you can be a highly devoted mother, you can be you can prefer even a submissive role within a relationship if you have a partner, those kind of things, while still promoting progressive values. You don't have to be Republican, conservative, religious, white to be in favor of families and in favor of community success. So, you know, I kind of hope that we can do some intersectionality on this panel, not just with race, class, and feminism, or with womanism, but also in terms of economics and political policy, war, incarceration, racism, like other things that are circling around the time period of the first and second wave of feminism, in this new weird space that we're in, where it's kind of like throwing everything at the wall, and everybody's picking some kind of binary position against another side. So
I think that what you spoke on in Delano Squires, who we just had on last week, there was a brief clip at the beginning where he mentioned about 4 of the 8 things that you mentioned, as well as contributing factors. And it's true that once people kind of laser in on something, I think we can attribute everything that's wrong with that. And I think that there's a reverse of that when it came to the discussion about the patriarchy and anything that's wrong or difficult in society or women's lives. Somehow, some way, it's like a man's fault. And I can see a version of the opposite version of this happening in discussions like this. And this is why I think this particular panel of people, I think, won't really do that. I think they'll have the nuance to, we can be very critical, hypercritical, and at the same time also be fair and maybe even objective. But Dr. Tia-san, real quick, I saw you kind of moving around when she was mentioning intersectionality and even down to, I think, the concept of, were we very healthy back when the nuclear family was more intact? What do you think, brother?
Oh, that was just a shoulder injury. That was nothing directed at her. No, but honestly, for me, the issue when you start talking about feminism, when you start talking about patriarchy, I think there's often a misalignment, and I think this happens in the Black community as well. These ideas are just used very glibly and applied with a broad brush, but there's often not a lot of context. I mean, when you start talking about Black folk, and this whole question of the nuclear family, obviously that wasn't a luxury we had, because coming out of slavery, you're talking about a lot of fictive kin, a lot of families that couldn't guarantee that they could stay together. And then, at Reconstruction and onward, you have all kinds of economic and political issues that block us from being able to participate in certain ways. So the family was never able to kind of be this ideal that the country is held to. And then when you start talking about, feminism and patriarchy, or we can start there. I mean, for a good portion of history, Black men were not considered men any more than Black women were considered women. So when you add that equation in, there's a whole period where by the time Black women start talking about Black feminism, there are debates about how much of this actually applies to the Black community, because a lot of the language is pulled directly from white women's movements. And as far as we get with these kind of questions, I like to make sure we kind of ground the conversation somewhat in the history, because some of this didn't apply. And that's a lot of Black men's issues with a lot of these discussions, a lot of these arguments, a lot of these issues going on now in regard to gender, and this kind of movement of making men toxic that we've seen for over the last decade. And that's added on to what Black men have been experiencing, at least within the Black community, for the last 40 odd years, where the conversation was about niggas not being shit. So there are layers of misandry that we're just now starting to talk about that hasn't been really made, reach the public, reach the mainstream. But in that, you still have all of these kind of discourses that just kind of assume, many men's positions. I mean, with patriarchy in and of itself, there's, you got all kinds of men that were never in a position to implement that on any systemic scale, and yet they're being kind of added in as if they were. So, I like to kind of qualify that a bit as we go.
Real quick, when you're referencing feminism, whether it's a critique, a praise, or something in between, it could be helpful to kind of acknowledge if it's more of the macro feminism, if there's one that's more from an intersectional perspective where you're kind of focusing on a particular group. Obviously, there's like liberal feminism and radical feminism, even Marxist feminism. There's obviously different strains. So if you can kind of open up with or include that kind of in your responses, at least so we know what it is that you're kind of critiquing and why. Alan and Dr. Brewer, what y'all thinking?
Well, I feel, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll wait.
I'm listening to all of you and I feel a little wet behind the ears because I never studied feminism in any way, shape, or form at all. I was raised inside of it. I drank the Kool-Aid completely, and I am still taking off the blinders. Like today, the level, right? Like, oh my gosh, like the way I just made that comment to my husband. Just for all of you, I'm a relationship coach, so I work with couples, and on Instagram, I primarily take on the women and the way we have been fully indoctrinated to trust our feelings, and our feelings are everything, right? And the abuse that comes from that. So that's my lens in particular. So I'm listening, I'm learning from all of you, seeing boots to the ground, right? The effects in the marriage and in the family that's going on as a result. And the men get it, they just can't say anything because it's not heard. And the women it's just over their head completely. And so my job is to help them see, just, right before this call, I had to really be direct. Like, listen, the way you are talking to your husband is pushing him so far over the edge. And it's just so hard for them to see it.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, good evening, panel. Appreciate you having me, Jeff.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn from you guys. From kind of where I'm sitting, doing interviews and things of that nature. One of the things that struck me, and I think you guys have mentioned it, is it's a growing bad faith amongst women towards men, right? So I remember I did a podcast, and the women brought up how part of the reason feminism has gained the level of support that it's gained is because a lot of women grew up hearing the horror stories of their grandmas and their aunts, right? They were cheated on, they were left for a woman down the road. And then I brought up, I was like, but there were a lot of men who came back from war and raised kids who weren't theirs, right? But we don't consider this, and I think the media also plays a part in driving the narrative of women being benevolent and men being vindictive or evil in some way, that even if he hasn't done anything, he's going to do something at some point, right? Or it just hasn't been discovered what he's done. And what makes me afraid, right? I have a little girl. I think that feminism was created with good intentions. I think what it's morphed into is a world where, like I said, young women have a bad faith perception of young men. And that is as a consequence, and Dr. Tiasan really spoke heavily on this, like it's disincentivized young men from wanting to be the best versions of themselves, right? I truly believe the best men that society creates are fathers, are coaches, are mentors, etc. And a lot of that incentive was women. It was the feminine, right? We wanted to make our mothers proud. We wanted to get a woman of a certain caliber and come home to our wife and kids saying, thank you, daddy. And these days, that seems like a dream for a lot of men. Like we talk about passport bros, we talk about young men going monk mode, but we don't talk about the symbiotic relationship women's expectations and men's performance have.
Mm. And anybody can respond and react to whatever it is that you're hearing. And again, just to define for the audience, and this is more of a semi-academic definition, feminism is broadly defined as the socio-political theory and practice of advocating for the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes. From a feminist scholar lens, they'll additionally focus on analyzing, critiquing, and dismantling the patriarchal systems and gender-based power structures across society. So yeah, I'll say that, I appreciate everybody already, and how you answered was already how I thought each of you would answer, with the lens of kind of what you tend to focus on. The initial thing that I was thinking about with the initial question being, has feminism succeeded or has it failed? I think it depends on what you think the goals were. I think if you believe that the goal of feminism was just primarily for women to get access to certain things and achieve certain markers, especially when it comes to career and the ability to purchase and own property and stuff like that, if you believe that's the goal, or that was the intended or overarching goal, then absolutely, we're clearly there. If you think that there were other goals, goals that were antithetical to human flourishing in some capacity in terms of reproduction. If you believe many feminists or groups that use feminists to push other goals, like deconstructing the nuclear family, separating men from having authority in the homes over children and women, almost, and if even their goal and concept of family, some feminists, even in the second wave, as early as I could find so far, if their goal was to kind of separate men and replace men by other means, whether it's the workplace, the government, and subsidies, even a communal thing amongst other women, if that was also a goal, I think they also succeeded. So I think for me, initially answering that question, I do think that for the individual person that's wrestling with this, every goal that I think feminists anywhere on the spectrum are going to have, I would say they would probably give it about 80% success rate. They don't believe it's complete. They still will quite often frequently, critique the patriarchy and all that they think is wrong in society and hurting and harming women. But they'll absolutely say that a lot of gains have been made. And it just depends on the individual woman or person who identifies with a particular feminist lens, what they're stating the goal is. If the goal is to marry and divorce who you want, to purchase property, to work in any industry you like those have all been absolutely met. And as I showed earlier with some of the stats, women are actually excelling in comparison to men in certain domains now, for sure. So that's an initial starting point for me. For each of you, what do you think not the original intended goal or definition of feminism, what it's presently doing, what it's presently looking like? Do you think it's been successful with what a present agenda of what feminists appear to be working towards? Do you think it's currently working to their favor, or do you think that they've gotten way off from what they had intended and now it's absolutely failing? Anybody can hop in.
I would say that when it comes to one of the core tenets of what we might call classical feminism or whatever wave and present day, liberation has been a big buzzword, right? But if your liberation requires the other gender to be a permanent villain, then you're not free. And I really think that that's part of the rub today, is that there's almost this subtext of we have to make men the villain. Men are trash. But then on the other side, we want men to make women the villain. Women are delusional, So it's like we can call out trash behavior. We can call out delusional behavior without calling out the entire gender, right? Mm-hmm. Or associating either of those things with, because women can be trash and men can be delusional too. So it's like, I just feel like the liberation push, we need to really assess what we mean by freedom, what we're getting free from, what liberation really consists of, and at what cost, who's winning, is there a winner and loser? And if there's a winner and loser, for people like me that have 3 Black sons, we need to succeed together. So if there's a winner and a loser that's going to break up my family, that's not a win for me as a mother. So I just really feel like that that label of villain is it just makes me kind of like, I'm not pro-feminist, I'm not anti-feminist, but I'm on the team of what actually makes safer, saner, more connected families.
I wanted to respond real quick to a couple of things that people said, because they really just stood out to me. In terms of like, what is modern feminism doing? Is it failing, succeeding? I'm not sure how to answer that, because I feel like a lot of the rhetoric has just gone too far and it's gotten too divisive. And it's like a lot of good movements that don't know when to stop, to some extent. And I'm not like something that Ariel Brewer said that I liked. You said you didn't grow up really being taught what feminism was, but you grew up inside of it. And I feel the same way. Like, nobody ever taught me what feminism was. I didn't have a class called, Introduction to Feminism. And when people talk about first wave, second wave, all this stuff, I feel a little bit lost in the waves. So somebody in the chat here, it was D Name and Handle, said, in what way has it improved anything? And I'm not even sure, because I'm not sure if it's to feminism that I owe my thanks that I was able to go to university, law school, graduate school, that I'm able to hold a job. If it is, then thanks feminism. But not really understanding the bounds of feminism and what was just sort of a progressive rights movement that where people regained footing after the Industrial Revolution. I'm not really sure to what to owe those gains. But if it's feminism, then I would say that it's done some positive things. And I thought that something that Dr. T. Hassan said that I really liked, you were talking about the history and the importance of recognizing the history. It made me think of Mary Harrington. She writes in the book, Feminism Against Progress, that this kind of picture that we have of the traditional family, it's really kind of an upper class Victorian fantasy, because so many families never had that. And if you look at pre-industrial revolution, women weren't just sitting in the house with a baby on their knee. They were working, doing textiles, making things, taking care of all kinds of parts of keeping the household running. So there was not a time when women were not economically engaged in being a part of life, you know? So this post-industrial revolution, sort of Victorian upper class fantasy of the single income family where mom stays home and just minds the kids and eats bonbons on the couch, that's just not been reality for so many people. And yeah, there were so many other things you guys said. Ellen, I want to just really quickly touch on something that you said about the de-incentivization for men, that how men have less incentive to really engage with women right now. And I think some of that comes down to the commodification of sex and how much that's just been allowed. Like if you can get like this OnlyFans thing, the explosion of pornography online, just the ease with which you can have some of those desires met. Well, what's the incentive to get into a relationship and to try to make yourself better in order to be a better partner? So it's kind of a downward spiral with both men and women circling the drain right now, and it's really concerning. So those are just some of my thoughts.
Can I respond to something? Something Leslie said I thought really was interesting when you talked about movements knowing when to stop. If you have a movement that is actually being financed, you know what I mean, well, you know, for decades, you know, does the movement know when to stop? Do we look at graduation rates and say, okay, we got some parity? Do we look at employment, especially in key areas? I think many of us have heard about Helen Andrews' work in feminization. Do we say, well, there's parity, and in fact, in certain areas we've gone over? Do we do that? I don't know too many movements that are, you know, well financed that do. And so I think that becomes part of the issue too. We have to talk about how there's been investment from the state level, from the federal level, and what that does on the ground, and how it disincentivizes people from pulling back and saying, you know what, our boys are not getting enough. You know, I mean, when's the last time you've heard that? Well, especially with K through 12, our boys are not getting enough. They're not graduating enough. Can we shift some of these resources toward them? Well, that's unthinkable. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where we are as far as that. But just real briefly, what I also wanted to say about feminism, as far as how I perceive it, most of my research is dealing with Black men. And that's my primary research focus. I'm a Black male studies scholar. The way I look at feminism is through the lens of Black men. And so what I notice, even though people are pulling away from using wave theory as a model of looking at feminism, but the way I've seen feminism is as a massive disruption, especially to Black male life. If you look at first wave feminism, it comes about right on this question of Black male voting. And there's almost a war that jumps off with white women and Black men and Black women on the question of voting. The same white women that were abolitionists that wanted to end slavery turned around and said, well, if Black men, you know, they shouldn't be able to vote first. You know, they're savages. We are the women that give birth to civilization. That argument, to me, is our introduction formally to Western feminism. You get to second wave feminism. This is taking place at a time where you have the civil rights movement. And what's the major disruptor of the civil rights movement, where you can almost call the end of it by the early 70s, late 60s? Rise of feminism, the seduction of Black women, the pull into this notion of Black feminism, and this cohesiveness of the Black community during the civil rights movement, we're starting to see dissipate by the time we see the rise of second wave feminism. By the time we get to third wave feminism, we're talking about what else is happening. There's the war on drugs. There's the post-COINTELPRO era, where you saw Black movements being dismantled by the FBI. When I look at feminism, those are the moments that I can't help but look at. You know what I mean? And so to me, I see it as a disruption to Black male life in a critical way, and by extension, the Black community as well. Because we're still having these debates, and Ketchy said it well. There's feminism, there's womanism. Those debates didn't come about until you had the seduction of Black women by white feminists into this question of what it meant to be a woman, what it meant to be Black, so on and so forth. But anyway, just wanted to kind of lay that out there.
Can I just clarify? Are you saying that the timing seemed a little too perfect?
I'm saying that it was very much part and parcel to the purpose of it. Now, I think there were multiple purposes. Obviously, women owning property, being able to have credit cards, bank accounts, you know, I have no issue with that. I don't know very many men that will, you know, start cussing people out because women have credit cards today, unless maybe they're married and they're highly in debt. You know, short of that. But the concept of it, I don't know too many men that are upset about. But, you know, but there's a political end to these arguments that has to also be looked at. So we can't just say, well, yeah, women should have the right to vote. Okay, cool. But what are some of these other areas that are being sidestepped, and how have they impacted people?
Right. Well, and I also think that in as much as, excuse me, I think that right now, like, in as much as it's political, it's also corporate, it's also capitalist. I mean, there's a monetization of the movements as well.
Mhm.
So even if the initial intention was good and pure, right, in the moment, the co-opting of the moment, you know, the opportunism of businesses, corporations, the greed, like, can just sweep in and take away all of the intention, the original intention of equality or fairness or justice. Because we don't talk a lot about like reproductive justice. We talk about reproductive rights, but you know, not about reproductive justice. We don't talk about family justice, like you said, with sons. I mean, there was a little bit of an awareness uptick with Black Lives Matter, a bit, but it's almost like for our sons when it's too late or whatever, you know, like that's, you know, police brutality level. So what can we do to insert that sooner? But once again, then that movement itself was also monetized. And so it's like, how do you have a pure movement? And I'm unlike the ladies who have said they grew up with feminism. I grew up in the opposite. It like flipped the whole coin over. I grew up with women were second class citizens, you know, in a very religious, almost cultish mindset of God, man, woman, child, animals. And your greatest aspiration is to be a wife and mother, which I still believe, you know, being a mother is my greatest accomplishment in life. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, some people might look at me and say that I'm what went wrong with feminism. I'm an OnlyFans creator. I am a sex coach in training. I am a former professor. I'm a single mother of 3 boys, 32, 24, and 10 are their ages. And it's like, you know, we can talk about feminism created this terrible situation, or we can also talk about how we adapt and survive, and who is really raking in the money, who's really profiting from these movements. It's usually not any individual or any particular family structure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm a single mom, but I'm not a broken home or whatever, you know, like you can have a context, but it doesn't mean that that's like a diagnosis or a problem. I think that, you know, many people are doing the best they can with what they have, and it gets remixed and reshuffled. But yeah, I think corporate greed is up there with the politics of it, as far as usurping those movements, monetizing them, keeping the binary and the polarity like strong, so people are constantly at war with each other, whether it's gender war, race war, class war, red and blue war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and real quick, I want to read a few super chats, and then I wanted to know from Alan and from Dr. Johnson, and then everybody else as well. Dr. Brewer, you had made that point earlier about being born in it, and Nkechi, even though you said in your household, it's true that feminism wasn't at all being pushed in your home. In the culture and society, I think the lens of what's what's happening to boys and men that are also born in that society, and is that affecting what's happening in relationships in the dating market and etc. What are your thoughts? I just wanted to hear from those two fellows first, and then everybody else as well. Like you said, like Dr. Brewer said, not only was she born into this concept of, you know, happy wife, happy life, you know, mom kind of runs the show, determined mom's the custodial parent by default. There's just certain things we just always assumed, and I wonder from these gentlemen's views, what does that look like when boys and men are also existing in a feminized culture and environment as well? But real
in
quick,
schools, I would love to hear their opinion on in the schools.
RC Tech or T Copyright, thank you for the $25. Greetings to this panel of intellectual heavyweights. Hey, I'll take that, brother. I don't know anybody ever said that about me. Great to see the good Dr. Tia San Johnson, especially, and everybody, if you're currently still watching, if you haven't done so, please make sure that you like, Share this with at least 2, 3, 4, or even 5 people. And if you do not want me to miss a comment or question that you have and want to ask anybody on the panel, please hit that super chat button. Or if you just want to show love. So guys, if you absolutely want and enjoying this, and if you want this type of work to continue, the super chats are going to go a long way, or becoming a member. Dusty indeed, $5. There are 5 white women, 2 FBAs, and 1 Nigerian man on the panel. To what extent do you think your different lineages colors your lens for this topic? That's an excellent question. I mean, we kind of were already starting to hit on that. I think that there's 2 approaches to it, from my opinion. The first approach is that you acknowledge that it exists and is a factor. And then there's those that that either consciously or unconsciously try to pretend or assume that it's not a factor in what's happening. I think white feminism and black feminism is absolutely different. I really do. I think that it's 2 different populations, 2 different general cultural experiences, 2 different histories with what it was that they're fighting and advocating for. Or do they have obviously things that's in common that benefits both? Absolutely. But do they have very, very unique differences, challenges, and even consequences when they try to live out some of the tenets of feminism? Absolutely, in my opinion. I don't know if 1 or 2 people wants to speak on this in terms of how this topic. How about you, Alan? Since you, what you think, man?
The FBA non-FBA distinction bothers me, but to give it some credence, I'm interested. I'm interested that it seems to be the case that African feminists seem to be more extreme than Western feminists for some reason. Right? So much so that Chimamanda Adichie, she once said, when she speaks to a lot of young feminists in Nigeria, they're just mean. Like she's saying that, right? And in my own anecdotal experience, I have 2 sisters. I navigate some, I guess Afro-American communities. People from Nigeria, people from Ghana, etc. It seems to be the case that people from West Africa in particular have clung on to feminism in a way that even Westerners haven't. And I'm surprised by it, especially given our history. Like I was talking about this the other day, some of the most prolific slave traders were women, right? The movie The Woman King about the Dahomey Amazons. The Dahomey were prolific slave traders, right? So this narrative that men have this monopoly on insidious behavior, women have this monopoly on doing right, and a world run by women would be run with justice and peace, and a world run by men is, the result of, or it's going to result in chaos and war. It's simply not true, right? So to that, comment, I'm interested by like why do people from my community cling on to feminism so aggressively?
Anybody else want to jump in on this?
Well, you asked a question earlier, I think, about how it is to grow up in it. Did I misunderstand you?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Well, I don't mind the delineation conversation as far as FBA and non-FBA, but it doesn't need to be hostile. So I'll just put it that way. I talk about the FBA lineage component of it because that's where my research.
All right, hold on real quick. For anybody that's on the panel or in the audience that isn't familiar, FBA is Foundational Black Americans. Boom.
Right. Or ADOS, American Descendants of Slaves. But I talk about it because that's my research. And I like to respect other groups. I don't like to assume that because you came from Nigeria or Jamaica or whatever, that you just experienced everything I'm talking about. I don't like to make those assumptions because I find it's far more fruitful to find out the histories and see how all the nuances play out differently. But to your question about growing up in it, people have to understand in the Black community, there was a huge kind of transition point between Boomer and Generation X women in regard to feminism. Boomer women were the last generation that were really trained to be wives. Gen X women were really pushed to go get a career, to be independent and live out this idea of independence on another level. So by the time we reached the 1980s, I'm a teenager. That was the first time I heard you have to have 6 figures to date me. You know what I mean? That's the first time I ever heard that. You have to own property. You have to drive a
In
nice
the
car.
80s.
That
Wow.
was, in the 80s was when I first, it's only snowballed since then. I mean, I have 17-year-old students in my classes where the young women will say, you need to make 100,000 to date me. And she's talking to the 17-year-old freshman sitting next to her. Both of them are first generation college students and come from no money.
Both broke.
Both.
That's crazy.
And this is a requirement. And when I have my students, I ask them, how many of you have a list of expectations? In the last decade that I've asked that question, I've never had one male raise his hand and say, we have a list of requirements for women. Every single woman I have ever had in my class has raised their hand. This kind of socialization project that's taken place in regard to feminism in the Black community has really pushed and incentivized women to operationalize it and even weaponize feminism in a very particular way. And it's in a way that most men have not been prepared for. Because even online, the conversations we're having in social media for men, that's only been available the last 10, 15 years. Prior to that, we didn't have a platform. So we watched the Oprah Winfrey Color Purple movies. We watched all of these programs, the talk TV every day, where you saw women being socialized into almost weaponizing feminism, and men didn't really have a collective space to organize a response until very recently. And I think it's intimidating a lot of people how much angst and frustration has been built up over the last 40 years with men experiencing it on the ground. It's almost like a script. You'd be surprised how many people word for word are reciting the same thing on the first date. What's your credit score? You know, how much do you make? What kind of job do you have? Are you a doctor, lawyer? Or if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, especially in the Black community, if you're not a doctor, lawyer, entertainer, athlete, then you're already on a second tier. You know what I mean? These things are almost crystallized in such fashion that I can say that I experienced this in my early years. When my son was 13, he's turning 21 in a couple weeks. He could tell me the same things going on in his school at the time that were going on when I was his age. The girls were requiring that he somehow be a six-figure earner in ninth grade. That was the rhetoric that they had come from home with. And it had reached that fever pitch where you have kids who are using these kinds of arguments against each other. And then you have to add the media component. And this is the last thing I'll say. My son at 13, 14 years old came up to me and told me, I've never seen a boy beat a girl at anything on TV or in movies. So this idea of feminization alongside feminism has kind of taken over in regard to media. Women are smarter, more courageous, stronger. They're kicking men through walls and they're 120 pounds. I mean, all of these things, this is what they're seeing. And so my son's telling me, I've never seen a boy beat a girl at anything. So what does that do to a generation of young men for the last 40 years that have been told that they're toxic, they're monsters, and that they're broke and incapable? They start withdrawing.
Underground. Yep, they go underground. And then we complain about it. Where are you? You're not showing up. You're not opening up. You need to be there for me emotional. It's horrible. So you're stuck. It's a double-edged sword. That's why I have so much empathy for the men who are just outraged. On one hand, I'm like, hey guys, like, you know, like, don't get so pissed at the women because, you know, it's not going to help, but I get it. I get it. What are you to do? Right. And these little boys who are growing up in the schools with like essential oils in the classroom and like dim lighting and sit still, and it's all women. They have no idea how to grow up into a man. Right. And they're being raised by men who are saying, yes, dear.
Very much
What
so.
do you do with that? Like, you know, it just, my heart goes out to these boys who are growing up into men. And then the expectation, like you're saying, is that they earn, they provide. It's just what they have to give, but they're not being fed, right? They're not being loved and appreciated by by a woman, right? You had said something, I'm sorry, Alan, earlier about how a huge part of what men do is because of the result of the feminine, right? It's you can't take that away, and we're abusing it. Absolutely.
But were you about to say something? And then Dr. Danny, and then I want to read a couple more super chats real quick.
Yeah, just really quick. I was just gonna say, you know, you said, well, they're being raised by men who are saying yes, dear, but really they're being raised by women, mostly white women, because they're being raised in eight plus hours a day in school, and the majority of those teachers and staff and administration are women, and most of them are white women. So it's kind of like, because we lost a lot of Black teachers with desegregation. So it's like we're telling men they can't be teachers because that's not a six-figure salary. You know, for sure, take that off the table. And especially like like the doctor was talking about, like with the Black community, you know, doctors, lawyers, you have to pull your family with you. And so you can't afford to be a social worker. Sorry, Jeff.
That's why y'all gotta hit the
You can't
button.
afford to be a teacher,
Yeah.
counselor, you know, something that's like not six figures. Like that's just, you know, you're not going to be able to like pull your community, your family, everybody with you, or get, you know, you're going to have to settle for a mid if you're going to get married and all these different things. So anyway, I feel like it's, as women of all stripes, we need to think about how we're raising our sons and how the teachers that are with our sons are affecting their perspectives and their lives. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of bullying of boys, you know, not just by boys, but by girls too. And that's, you know, we're telling our sons they can't really stand up for themselves because,
Yep.
you know, DV and trauma. Well, DV and trauma suck, right? And we need divorce as an escape hatch from harm. But that's not the only conflict resolution skill we should be teaching. We should also be teaching people how to communicate and have boundaries and, you know, self-respect.
Well, and men and boys to have the integrity to say no. Like this, no.
100%. 100%.
If I could add, I think for me, that's what's been the most disappointing about at least neo-feminism, right? So for instance, when Netflix released the Manosphere documentary, right? When they followed those pseudo-masculine guys in Miami and the Europe equivalent of Miami, they don't do a really good job talking about the reality of what boys are facing, right? Like now people are talking about clavicular and looks maxing and all that good stuff. And it's talked about in a way where, like, for the 16, 17-year-old boy listening, it's like, it's all in your head, it's made up. Or even the show Adolescence.
Yep.
They're not addressing like the realities these guys are facing. Like clavicular is popular because what he does gets women. Like, let's look at the facts, right? These pseudo-masculine Andrew Tates and Dan Balzerian, like, there is a sector of women that validate their behavior, and it's not just prostitutes, right? So there's this like separation that happens when we're talking about women. We're talking about the best women, and when we're talking about men, we're talking about the worst men, as opposed to like acknowledging how the worst women contribute to the worst men in a way that we're sometimes unwilling to acknowledge. So, you know, that's something I wish was introduced into a lot more conversation that critiques boys and men.
You know, if I could just respond real quick, I think something that there's a lot in what everybody's saying about how society is shaping the experience of young men and boys. And this might sound like a non sequitur, but I would just put in a plug to homeschool your children. Homeschool your kids and keep them off devices. You can give your kids a better foundation than what they're going to get out there in those schools right now. I was tempted to homeschool when I was raising my daughters, but when my older son went into kindergarten, we did it for a couple of months, and I pulled him right out because that was torture. And I can see, especially for an energetic young boy, he was just looking at being in trouble every day, and it's been the greatest decision ever to take him out of school. So I know that's a little, but it kind of actually, it's not really a non sequitur because it kind of goes back to the heart of what we're talking about with feminism. What is your role as a woman? And I think it's so important to value motherhood and mothers and to be a mother to your children and not give them to other people to raise. And that goes beyond just daycare. I think that we need to take more accountability and really start valuing the role of raising children in thetheir family. And that's one of the things that's just gone right out the window. And I can remember my whole, I have 4 children and I've raised them all myself without daycare. You know, even when working part-time, they're with their dad or they're with a family member if I'm working. So I think it's so important to structure your life in a way that you're the one responsible for your children's well-being and their education.
Yeah. Now, again, this is easy, just to be clarified, this is obviously easier said than done when it comes to everybody's financial situations. If they're a single parent, of course.
Yeah, but you can have one car. It's not going to kill you. I mean, there's a lot of times people can cut back.
Again, like even with homeschooling, I was homeschooled and it was an abusive situation. So homeschooling, I feel like I don't want to just like, disagree flat out, but honestly, it's the container. It's not the content. Like, depending on what curriculum, depending on how you're doing it, depending on if you're just keeping your girls at home so you can sexually abuse them or something. Like, homeschooling can be done all kind of ways wrong, right? And public school can be done all kind of ways wrong. And we have to do the best that we can for our kids to keep them safe, to keep them healthy, to keep them, teach them boundaries and so forth. But I just have to interject that, yeah, homeschooling can go wrong too.
I just want to say one quick thing on that front, just because, like, I know a lot of you are saying you kind of grew up in feminism. I was born in the former USSR. So I come from that background, and my family, their family. And so I am very sensitive to what happens when people become products of the state. And it continues to happen more and more and more. I'm very sensitive to that and I think that's why I feel such compassion for boys, because, there's this concept of Soviet masculinism in that these generations after generations of men literally become sons of the motherland. Like, all of their attachment is gone. They feel like instruments. They're really not humans anymore. And what actually ended up happening in the USSR, because everyone had to work, everyone's a proletariat, there was no difference. Women and men, everyone had to go to work. They had to invent these differences so that men felt like they were, their ego was intact. So they would tell women, you can't drive, or you shouldn't do this, all these silly things, just to give men this ego boost that was so fake, because ultimately deep down their humanity was gone. Yep. And so it's so important. I think it all comes down to relationships and coming back to, what is the purpose? What are we here for? And I think when we think about how far gone relationships have become, it's a really good place to start.
Real quick, because I've heard this theme a couple times, and I think it was both with Leslie and Nkechi that I definitely caught on to what I was hearing. When it comes to feminism, do they actually have an answer for what's the purpose for women in existence? Like, what's the purpose for what it is that women are supposed to do over the course of their lifespan? Is it liberation, to be free to do whatever they want? Is it to usher in the next generation from a reproductive level and have a hand in their upbringing? Is it something in between? And I think that that's, again, really connected to this discussion of what feminism has done well or what it's potentially brought harm in. I want to read off a few quotes, and for everybody, that we already did an hour, so if any of you can't stay any longer, absolutely understand. But I just want to read off a few of these to kind of just throw it out there and see what you guys think. You all think. Linda Gordon, the nuclear family must be destroyed. Whatever its ultimate meaning, the breakup of families now is objectively revolutionary process. Ayelet Waldman, I am not just pro-choice, I'm pro-abortion. I am happy I had an abortion. It made my life possible. And then we also had Chelsea Handler that said, I don't like people who have babies and act like they did something that the rest of us can't figure out. Anybody can have one, okay. I've had 3. I could have had 3 if I had gone through with any of my pregnancies. And Sheila Cronin, since marriage constitutes slavery for women, it is clear that the women's movement must concentrate on attacking this institution. Freedom for women cannot be won without the abolition of marriage. Obviously, those are a lot of different thoughts. But these women in my head, these women are stating what they believe the purpose isn't for women. So, compete with that if y'all can. And Dr. Danny, I haven't heard from you and in a little bit. So if you wanted to hop in, you're more than welcome to.
I was just going to say that, I'm far from an expert on American Black history, and even less on Black men in particular. But listening to Dr. T talk about that intersection between the Black civil rights movements and the feminism running interference. It just reminded me of what we've seen more recently with the rape gang scandal in the UK, where we've seen feminism be somewhere between silent and, running defense for the grooming gangs. And we've sort of seen where feminism is coming in and attacking the lower class, and I think that's the parallel. In England, what you've got in Northern England is all the working class girls, and these were the girls that were the primary targets of the grooming gangs, mostly white and to a lesser extent the Sikh girls as well. But what they had in common is that they were absolutely, definitely the working class, lower class of England. And the feminists completely abandoned them and continue to still with very few notable exceptions. And so what we see with feminism is we see it abandoning or using as cannon fodder any class of people that it feels is sufficiently beneath it in social capital that it can take from them and exploit from them. And I think we see that as a parallel running through. In terms of whether feminism has succeeded and what its ultimate goals are and whether it has an answer for women, I think that by its stated goals, it has objectively succeeded by any objective measure. But I disagree with you, Jeff, though, when you said that you would assume that, say, 80% of feminists would probably concede that, because I think there's a tremendous gulf between, like, you're assuming a logic that just isn't there. You're assuming an acknowledgement of facts and evidence that is irrelevant to feminism. And feminism is not unique in that regard. Most ideological movements are largely insensitive to facts and reality. And it's not my experience that a large proportion of feminists would pat themselves on the back and say the job is done. In fact, if anything, we see a little bit of an inversion of that, actually. But the more you see the objective measures running in favour of women, the more extreme the feminist movement tends to become, so that, we're starting to see a scandalization and a demonization of basic flirting behavior between the sexes, and that being categorized and caricatured as a form of sexual harassment or even a form of sexual assault or sexual abuse. Whilst at the same time, though, actual rampant sexual assault and abuse in the form of the grooming gangs is given a pass and is at least waved away with some vague reference to Islamophobia and some acknowledgement that most of the people talking about it appear to be right wing, so obviously we can ignore those. And it's really it's really excused, and yet supposed offences from men that are far more benign, and in fact, by any objective measure, you would struggle to call them offences and keep a straight face. And yet these are now being sort of elevated to the kind of worst thing that men can do. So I guess the kind of epitome of that is this demonization of the male gaze. Like, certain men can organize grooming gangs to literally sexually assault tens of thousands of young English girls, but certain other men will be demonized for simply looking at a woman. There's no point attempting to try and use logic and evidence to reason about where feminism and where feminists will tell you what they've achieved and what they haven't achieved. So I'd say that by all objective measures, it succeeded in its stated goals, and it won't stop. So, and again, that's not unique. Feminism, social movements don't ever stop. They occasionally break down, and they do occasionally lose the consent of the general public, and themselves become derided. And if that doesn't happen sufficiently soon, then you see what happens in the USSR, and in fact, the whole of the society ends up having to collapse because the social movements never stop. They just keep going until they reach their logical end, and the logical end of many of them, certainly the ones that we've looked at and been watching in the 20th and now 21st century, the predictable end is the collapse of civilization, and feminization is no different. or feminism is no different in that. So your question about the goals, feminism's stated goals have varied over time, and they have been always slightly to the antenatal side of whatever is the norm. Now that antenatal attitudes have become quite normalized, feminism is, of course, even more and more extremely antenatal. That's what joins up all of the different threads of feminism together, whether it's classical feminism, first wave, second wave, radical. What joins all of those threads together is they all sit slightly to the antenatal side of whatever is currently society's norms, with the goal of, or the result of, dragging society further down the antinatalism path. And there's I completely agree with whoever was before that mentioned the importance of economics and other institutions and all that. But all of this is a complex system. None of these things are happening in isolation. You can't separate the great feminization that Helen Andrews is talking about from either feminism, nor can you separate it from its sort of downstream economic consequences, which are then feeding into the problems that we're seeing with decreased productivity and increased inflation and all these other types of things. So I think it has succeeded in its stated goals. I think it is also succeeding in its actual unstated goals, which is simply to separate women from motherhood. Feminism doesn't have a plan for what it wants women to do. It has a very, very clearly articulated plan for what it doesn't want women to do. What it doesn't want women to do is successfully raise children. Anything else is fine. Anything else is fine. Unsuccessfully raising children, great. Being a terrible mother, great. Having abortions, fantastic. Choosing to go child-free, awesome. Anything other than successfully raising well-adjusted, successful children is absolutely fine in the feminist doctrine. Raising well-adjusted, successful children, investing your time in that and making that your vocation and your priority, not fine. And just sort of picking up on what Leslie was saying in the context of homeschooling, saying that it's so important to revalue motherhood. And the doctrine and the ideology and the popular discourse that has devalued motherhood the most, certainly throughout all of my life, so that's the last 47 years, it's been feminism. Feminists are the ones that are devaluing motherhood. Feminists are the ones that are telling women that it's the quotes you were saying before, that marriage is a trap, that, children are a burden, that somehow being at home and looking after your children is missing out on something else, missing out on anything. Anything else that you could be doing is framed as more favorable than being a mother. That is what feminism is. The purpose of a system is what it does. And that is what feminism is currently doing. And it is succeeding the world over. The birth rates are declining the world over. And yes, that's obviously an outcome that is a result of a complex system. But I would challenge anyone to point out a component of that system that cannot itself be causally traced back to feminism. I don't think.
Wow.
Jeff, I do have to leave, and I apologize because things are about to get loud. But I wanted to thank Jeff for inviting me. I wanted to thank the panel. I learned from your comments. I appreciate what you have to say. Shout out to Alan and his adorable daughter. But I just wanted to very quickly say before we go, one of the problems with feminism has been this kind of what Kevin Samuels used to call the development of this low boiling contempt for men that has become very common. And I think that now we kind of hinted on that earlier, but the reason I bring it up here while I'm stepping out the door is I don't think we really thought what that long-term impact would be. And more than the fact that you have young men and older men who are withdrawing, who are doing everything from going monk to getting passports. More than that, I think you're seeing the potential collapse of a society. Nobody really wants to think about what it looks like when men check out, what it looks like in a society. And most people can't imagine what it's going to look like in America. We're already seeing it. We're already hearing about the complaints, but there are a lot of things in the news that are going on that most people don't associate with men checking out. And it's directly connected, but it's not always articulated that way. But I think we're seeing it. So there's been a serious underestimation of what the impact is of dismantling and disregarding masculinity for boys, for men across the board. And I think the cost is going to be too great for people to really deal with, especially as the economy is tanking. It is not an economy that is ever, I'm talking about North America, has never been situated for individuals to thrive by themselves. It was always predicated on some idea of family. Now, we can debate what types of family, but individuals, no. And especially women as individuals or single mothers, the society was not built for that. So the removal of men is going to have serious consequences, and I think most of society is unprepared. So I just wanted to say thank you for the invitation, good brother. I apologize for leaving it early. I didn't want to disrupt the show, but thank you for having me.
Listen, I appreciate you coming through, and I definitely want to see if I can do this at least once a month. I'll have to check those super chats. But I think that even just the kicking off this panel with all of you, the 7 of you, there's just so many things I'm realizing that each of us can learn. And I think these types of conversations, listen, we could have had a panel where we're all arguing and debating and trying to do gotcha stuff, but I felt like there's just so much more that we can take away from this in terms of areas to explore, reevaluate in our own homes, our own lives. And I think each of you are just brilliant at articulating your lens of the good and bad that comes with these systems. And I appreciate you coming through for the first time.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So real quick, y'all, we're going to be closing things out in the next 5 minutes or so. Obviously, listen, if I had all the time in the world, I would do this for another 2 hours. So I've already been enjoying it thoroughly. Each of you, let's start with, is there anything else that you wanted to share in terms of just your overall thoughts about anything we've kind of covered? Or did you want to share what you've learned or gained in understanding and knowledge from over the course of this conversation? You can kind of go in either directions.
Could I jump in just to respond to what Danny was saying before? She was talking about separating the mother from the child, and I don't think we realize the effects of that, right? When you separate a mother with a child grows inside of our bodies, in our bodies. When we separate ourselves emotionally from that child, we are separated from so much more than just the child. We're separated from ourselves deeply, deeply, and we're definitely separated from our husband. We don't have the capacity to feel another human being, and we need to feel another human being in order to respect them, in order to care about their feelings, right? All this is like, it's disrespect. That's what it comes down to, right? So if you're just disrespecting your own body, what your body is designed to do and bring into the world, oh my goodness, right? Like it just has extreme effects. Like, so the women who are walking around saying like, I can do it all, right? I can have the kids, I can have the career. Yes, you can, but you are also just walking from your head up. Like, you are disconnected from your body, I promise you, because you cannot take your little baby child and hand it over to daycare at 3 months without disconnecting from your child and yourself and your emotions at the same time. That has effects. You will not be able to feel your husband's pain at the result of how you're treating him or whatever if you can't touch and deal with the pain that you have suppressed, by giving up your child. That's just an example, right? When we disconnect from ourselves in this deep, deep way, it has consequences.
Anyone else?
Just to jump in, I feel so deeply what you're saying, Ariel. It takes about 18 months to properly attach, for an infant to properly attach to their caregiver, 18 months. And a baby's bidding for attention 15 to 18 times an hour. And so obviously not everyone's going to get it perfect, but the idea of, 60, 70% of being that present face, that present body, spirit, right? Real contact, real relationship is the emotional, physical, spiritual connection that is built over time in a consistent manner. And it's all about, attachment theory. And I think I did just want to bring to the table as well the notion that, maybe the first attachment fracture really happened at the Industrial Revolution, and when Dad left the home, and when he left the land, and then when the family became dispersed, and really thinking about maybe some of that grief that we all carry in our bodies over, our grandparents and their grandparents, and just knowing that, Dad's absence, and then, living in a society in which his only value is production, and then he embodies that, and then he thinks that, and that's how he lives, and then what kind of connection does that leave between a man and wife, and then between a man and wife and their children? And so really coming back to attachment theory and realizing maybe, that's an important piece to bring to the conversation about why there's so much contempt and where the pain is really coming from for people.
Mm-hmm. And real quick, before other people jump in, what you mentioned about the attachment theory, I realized when I look at this system, a healthy attachment for many feminists doesn't include the requirement for the presence of men or fathers in their lives. And that's like the idea, the insanity of saying, oh, you don't need a mom. You don't need women to have a healthy, meaningful, great life, especially when you're growing up in development. That sounds insane to me. And we are literally saying that every single day on social media in our own very nuanced ways, whether it's in both directions, but especially amongst a lot of feminists, current feminists, that attachment is not seen as essential. It's seen as a bonus, but it's seen as a bug, but not like, was it a bug, but not a feature? Like fatherhood, masculinity, the role of men being a necessity to be a healthily, well-developed, securely attached person. Men and their presence isn't seen as a factor. Wow, I appreciate you, Anya, for kind of throwing that out there.
I'll tell you, I had to do a lot of work on that with my dad issues, so I know it's very much an important thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to jump off on the attachment theory piece that she talked about, just in terms of the first, in my research is the first 12 months, but 18 months, 2 years, whatever, through the potty training stage, let's say, it's so crucial for a primary caregiver to be bonding with a baby or child that young, an infant. And, people may disagree with my choices, but I don't think they can shame my outcomes, because I have every single one of my kids, I've been there with them through their first 2 years. And that has meant adapting with what I do for income. But it doesn't mean that at any point I was willing to go through that pain of being separated from my infant, while breastfeeding, while being, the primary caregiver. That is such a crucial part. And there have been even studies like school to prison pipeline. They've even suggested preschool to prison pipeline. There are younger ages in which, if there's not a primary attachment or primary bond, kids, especially boys, can be slated as a problem child or discipline situation, kicked out of daycare.
Yep.
Not allowed in all these daycare, they expelled from daycare. And then that bond is what gives us the value for human life. And so it's so essential to have a nurturing role to in a mother figure, ideally both parents being in that nurturing position. But I also want to talk about just really quickly, one thing that we didn't address was abortion very much. We didn't talk about that. It's a hot button topic. But I think that men also deserve the right to choose. And we don't talk a lot about, that. And as somebody who has had abortions and also who has chosen not to have abortions, my youngest child, his dad wanted the decision to be an abortion, and I respected his choice. And he hasn't paid a cent of child support as a result and has opted out of being involved. That's his choice. If it would have been a baby in his body, he would have had the choice to do that, right? But we don't talk about with feminism, one of the big goalposts, and I agree with the other panelists saying like feminism keeps moving the goalposts. And that's why we can't decide if it succeeded or failed, because
Yep.
this is the goalpost is like equality, but then like what about if we could be better than men, or be like a little bit, have a little more power maybe, like just to get back at them, right? And then like maybe we could have just a few more choices and make more demands, and so it just kind of like spirals. But America tends to overcorrect, I feel like, on social issues anyway. But yeah, I feel like the goalposts keep moving. And one of those goalposts was choice. But once again, we're not thinking about choice for the other gender or genders, like it's just women have the right to choose. What about men? If it was an unplanned pregnancy, takes two to make that happen. So
Yeah, and real quick, maybe that might be the next topic when I do another one of these types of panels, is the discussion related to reproductive rights and how do feminists versus everybody else, what's the argument, and what should it potentially be? And I would even argue a central tenet of feminism currently, especially as currently constructed, is the liberation and freedom of choice and optionality for women in all domains, and to never be limited with what those choices are. And the reason why I say that is that by default could never be extended to be in a discussion that men could partake in, because it would infringe upon the choice or freedom of the individual woman to quote unquote make that choice. And then I would even argue that that being the central tenet of elevating their freedom to choose the life she wants to live, the life she wants to carry or not, that's superior to what happens to that potential life. That it's her choice is greater than the life inside of her, or the potential development of that life inside of her. What's central is her having that freedom of choice to begin with.
Emotions.
So anything that infringes upon that, which includes men being a part of the reproductive discussion at all, especially as it relates to whether or not she does or doesn't proceed with an abortion, feminists by default, I think, are trained to have to go against that, because they would think that's giving up leverage and power to the patriarchy if they did something like that. For those who haven't spoken, to kind of close us out, thoughts on the panel? Any initial thoughts that you still want to share? And would you be open to doing this again?
Yeah, I'll jump in. For me, I appreciate this conversation because I think a lot of conversations, especially on social media, they're simply not sophisticated, right? Like we paint things with a broad brush. We're heavy-handed with certain critiques. Like I'm reminded of like some of the feminist propaganda around, behind every great man is a great woman. That works in the inverse as well. Behind every horrible man is often a horrible woman, right? Anything you can do, I can do better. That includes murder. that includes a lot of insidious things throughout history, right? Like we also have to address how a lot of the worst behaviors from men are sometimes the origin is a woman. Like R. Kelly, for instance, he was molested by I think his sister or his aunt.
Yeah.
Those stories usually don't come up, right? Because we want so desperately to make men the villain, right? And I think if modern social discourse was interested in the complexity of human behavior, and the complexity of, even, some of the negative things people do, we would realize that men and women are simply people, right? And they should be respected as people, but they should also be like, for lack of a better term, policed as well, and not given just a broad benefit of the doubt, right? I think if we want a world that is better, safer for our daughters, it's not simply about teach boys not to XYZ. No, create a world where men are aspiring to a type of persona that doesn't XYZ, which means women have a responsibility in that regard as well. But often, to the point that you guys have brought up, it remains everything that women don't want to be, not how women want to participate in a future we want to see. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, everybody else, go ahead.
Well, I'll say real quickly. Well, first of all, this has been really, really enjoyable, and I've enjoyed listening to everybody's thoughts. Really great panel, and thanks, Jeff, for doing it. Sort of piggybacking off of what Alan was saying, I think that the good news is that demographics and sociological observations don't tell the whole story. They tell the broad strokes. They tell you the trends, but they don't tell you about the individual, because at the individual level, our experiences may vary quite a bit and we have quite a lot of choice. And when you see those trends, you can choose to do something different. And so whenever you talk about, what's happening with, there was somebody in the chat that I always like the haters. They're fun for me. So when somebody's like, Leslie's so annoying, I think somebody said earlier, that whenever somebody says women need to be accountable, I just say, well, what about the men? Well, I guess I'm kind of a natural contrarian, and I always look at the devil's advocate, and I dislike broad strokes thinking because I think that it's reductive and it reduces the complexity of the human experience to something that is just a stereotype at the end of the day. So the good news is that you can see these things happening, but you can also find really good people still. You can be somebody different, and you can find different experiences in your life. And so I think that there's still a lot of hope for optimism, despite where we're at being kind of bleak in a lot of ways. Especially if you spend a lot of time online, you're going to feel pretty bleak. But we all have freedom of choice, and we can behave in ways that represent the values that we want to perpetuate in the world.
Any others that want to close us out who haven't spoken to close us out? I think it was Ariel, Dr. Danny, and Anya.
Did I not?
Yeah.
I thought I did. I didn't want to take up space. No, I appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to hear everybody's perspectives, because I'm not reading about feminism and learning about it. Like I said, I am actually just seeing the effects in sessions of it. And so it's really interesting to me to hear a little bit more background and perspective on it. So thanks everybody for that.
Same here. Just want to say thank you. I feel like I've learned so much from all of you and all of your thoughts, and I'm looking forward to the next one. I love the optimistic end note. I think there's some really wonderful people doing some beautiful work on themselves and kind of letting their shadows come to the surface so that they can integrate them and overcome them. And they really want families and so I'm excited about that.
And real quick, Dr. Danny, before you come in, everybody that's currently watching, if there is going to be hope, it's going to be that these types of conversations make it everywhere, where men, women, different ethnicities, nationalities, whatever, being able to just have the conversation, hear different perspectives, even different lenses, and not throwing out the baby with the bathwater is kind of what I've taken from this conversation. And Catchy, I absolutely appreciate your lens when it came to OnlyFans. So if I do future panels, we may have a discussion on the OnlyFans and sexual liberation and the whole nine, because I think that we're not going to understand each other better if we can't listen, if we can't just hear other perspectives. And for those who are watching, this is the type of stuff that I want you guys to send to as many people as you can. And if you see clips going viral or make sure you tag the people and follow the people that you think are handling these conversations and doing good work in this space. And I hope that this is just one of many future panels to come. I got to bother all y'all to see how often I can get y'all each month to do something like this. But I'll just say for myself, this was very rewarding to be able to get each of you gifted, orators, to be able to just share your lens on this topic. And there's already, y'all let me know I don't read enough. That's the most clearest thing I realize in these types of conversations, but it's rewarding for me personally to be able to have people who, when you've thought these thoughts and you've been alone in your work settings, in your homes, in a lot of your environments where you can't have these types of conversations, this is like building community for me. It's building community. And I think that there's if there's going to be hope, it's going to be us investing in these types of things and other people reaping the benefits as well from our journey of what we're discovering as well. So Dr. Danny, Silikasi, why don't you close us out with your final thoughts as well? and then we'll see what the audience has to say once this kind of goes out there.
I think this has been a fantastic panel. You can count on me coming back anytime, so you can tick that one off at least. I think that the last observation that I'll make is I think that it was really interesting and good, I think, to bring up a different perspective on abortion, and then the observation that women would feminism at least would find it difficult to accommodate male choice in that context, because one of the central feminist doctrines is the unlimited and unbridled female choice. And I think I think there's a truth to that, and I think it goes beyond the abortion rights or the reproductive rights that feminism focuses on very strongly in the context of female choice. I think that one of the things that feminism focuses on is this unbridled choice, because a functional society limits everybody's choices in every domain. You cannot build a prosperous civilization when everybody is just chasing hedonism. Prosperous civilizations limit everybody. And I think that's one of the perhaps less talked about sort of aspects of feminism that just feeds into this civilizational decline and destruction, because it wants to allow women to be completely hedonistic and completely unconstrained in their choices in every domain. And there is no demographic group that you can give that to and expect to keep social cohesion and prosperity. I think that's. I'll just apologize now for taking what was a rather optimistic ending. I'm not good at optimism. Next time we'll start on these final ones with me, and we'll end on some.
Well, listen,
Jeff, can I just say one more thing, just like super quick? But maybe the next panel could be like not pessimism or optimism, but just somewhere in the middle of accountability. Because I think that that's one of the big things that my adult sons who are in their 20s and 30s, there is no accountability demanded for women right now in many different spaces, and there is kind of a lot of maybe as we've talked about with you can't even flirt anymore and all these other things, like has the accountability gone too far from men and it's like women are just running amok, or is it maybe in some contexts like a mixture of both or whatever? But anyway, I think accountability could be a really awesome topic.
Listen, I would say not only would that be a great topic, I would have a very probably nuanced. I think that the accountability that women receive is just not overt, and it's not something that is front facing. It's almost like a consequence that happens on the back end, if that makes sense. Especially with time, I think the consequences kind of reap themselves. But yeah, I think that could definitely be up on the table. Listen, I love all y'all. To get y'all all to come through, thank you. So real quick, if you can, just simply say where people can find and support you, and then we'll close out. Start with Alan, Ariel, then everybody can just hop in.
All right. Again, appreciate you, brother. This was a fantastic conversation. Panelists, thank you guys so much. It was great meeting each of you. You can find me on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube at WNT Talk. The channel is called We Need to Talk. Check out some of the content. I think you'll like some of the conversations we're having there.
I am on Instagram, Ariel_Brewer_.
I'm on YouTube. That's probably the best place to find me. The Radical Center, and we host a live stream every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Jeff's been a guest. It's a good time, so come and join us there.
Thank you, everybody. You guys can find me on YouTube or Instagram. It's Ancient Intelligence.
Thank you so much, Jeff. You can find my art at nkchidiallo.art, or you can find my socials at Rachel A. Dolezal on Instagram. FKA, that was my former name. And I'm also on OnlyFans. So you can find me at Rachel Dolezal on OnlyFans as well. But yeah, anyway, Trad Pro podcasts on YouTube. I'm out there in a lot of different spheres.
And I'm a Dr. Danny S on X. I have a Substack as well, but find me on X, and that you'll find everything there.
Awesome. So panelists, thank y'all again. I will be in touch very soon. And as I let you all go, I'm going to close things out to bring a word from our sponsor. So yeah, man, I hope that everybody that watched this, I hope that y'all enjoyed it. I hope that y'all love this. I'm very interested to see how, what you all think. I'm very, very hopeful that this is kind of change the game when it comes to how we can engage in really tough, even controversial topics like the one we covered today. So I'm just going to share a word from our Anson Belt, our sponsor for this particular episode. And then after that, I'm going to kind of close things out. Hey, y'all, it's Jeff St. James from Ask a Brother podcast. And I would like to thank today's sponsor. I made the switch to Anson Belt and Buckle, and I'm never going back.